Las Vegas, in July of 1968, and the Desert Inn was packed on a Saturday night like any other. Dean Martin, born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, was getting ready for his 11 o'clock show. Just one more performance in a city where he'd done this hundreds of times before. The King of Cool was at the height of his fame, with The Dean Martin Show dominating NBC primetime, and classics like That's Amore and Everybody Loves Somebody making him a household name across America. But sitting front row was Vincent Martell, a Chicago mob boss with connections spreading through the Midwest like a spider web. Unions, gambling operations, restaurants, construction companies, all of it had Vinny's fingerprints somewhere on the paperwork. Dean knew exactly who Vinny was, and everyone in Vegas knew too. You couldn't work in that town without learning who controlled what and where the invisible lines were drawn. Dean had always kept his distance from that world. He performed in their casinos and cashed their checks, but he didn't socialize with them or owe them favors or want to be tangled up in their business. Frank Sinatra had complicated relationships with these men. Sammy Davis borrowed money from them, and even Joey Bishop and Peter Lawford walked carefully around certain people. But Dean stayed clean and professional and separate from all of it. That changed tonight. Dean was in his dressing room going through his pre-show routine when someone knocked. A man in an expensive suit walked in, one of Vinny's people, and his message was simple. Mr. Martell would like to say hello before the show. Dean set down his drink and said to tell Mr. Martell he appreciated the thought, but he was preparing, and he'd see him after the show if he wanted. The associate made it clear that Vinny was in the front row and wanted to see him now. It wasn't a request, and Dean understood that much. When men like Vinny Martell sent their people to fetch you, you either went or you made an enemy. Dean stood up and said, 5 minutes, that's all I have. He followed the associate through the backstage area to a hallway near the showroom floor, and Vinny was waiting with a cigar and 4 men who looked like they'd been hired specifically for their ability to hurt people. Vinny's voice boomed when he saw him. Dean Martin, the King of Vegas, I wanted to say hello before your show. Dean shook his hand and felt Vinny's grip, too firm, the kind of grip from a man who needed to prove something with every interaction. Vinny started talking about how they were both Italian boys from the old neighborhood. Well, different neighborhoods, but you know what I mean. Then he mentioned knowing Dean's family back in Steubenville, how his uncle used to go to his father's barber shop and said he was a good man with immigrant values and a strong work ethic. And then Vinny asked about Dean's brother. Something cold moved through Dean's chest when Vinny said, "You had an older brother, right? What was his name?" "Willie," Dean said. "We called him Bill." Vinny nodded like he was genuinely interested and said, "Right, Bill. I heard he died recently from a brain tumor." Dean's older brother, William Crocetti, had died just months earlier in October of 1968. Brain tumor at 52 years old. Dean hadn't talked about it publicly much, because grief was private and family was private. But in a town like Vegas, information traveled whether you wanted it to or not. "That's right," Dean said. Vinny shook his head and his voice took on this sympathetic tone, while his eyes stayed calculating, watching Dean's reaction like he was studying something. "That's tough. Losing family is the worst thing. How old was he?" 52, Dean told him. Vinny acted shocked and said, "That's young, way too young. You know what probably did it? Stress. I bet he was stressed trying to keep up with his famous little brother. That'll kill a man, living in someone else's shadow and never quite measuring up." Dean went completely still. Vinny kept going, either not noticing or not caring what he was doing. "I mean, here you are, big star, making millions on TV and in movies and playing Vegas, hosting the Dean Martin Show every week, singing That's Amore to sold-out crowds. And there's Bill, probably working some regular job and wondering why he didn't get the talent, why you got all the luck. That kind of resentment eats at you, literally eats at your brain until it gives out." One of Vinny's associates actually chuckled at that, and the others stayed silent and just watched. Dean looked at Vinny, really looked at him, and Vinny must have seen something in Dean's eyes because his smile faltered for just a second. "That's a terrible thing to say," Dean said quietly. Vinny brushed it off and said, "What? I'm just being honest, that's probably what happened." Dean's voice stayed quiet when he said, "No, you're being cruel. There's a difference." Vinny's smile came back harder, and he said, "Cruel? I'm just stating facts." Dean told him he was making jokes about his dead brother in front of strangers, and suggesting he died from jealousy or resentment when Vinny didn't know him, never met him, had no idea what kind of man he was. Vinny tried to interrupt, but Dean cut him off. "I know what you're saying, and I'm telling you to stop." The hallway went silent in a way that felt dangerous. Vinny's associates tensed up because you didn't tell Vincent Martell to stop doing anything, not if you wanted to keep your teeth. Vinny's face turned red, and he said, "You got some nerve, Martin. You know who I am." Dean's answer was simple. "I know exactly who you are." Vinny stepped closer and said, "Then you know you don't talk to me like that." Dean didn't back up an inch. "I'll talk to you however I need to when you're disrespecting my brother's memory." They were face to face now, and Dean could smell the cigar smoke on Vinny's breath, could see the anger building in his eyes like pressure in a sealed container. Vinny said, "Your brother was nobody, a nothing. He died a nobody, and the only reason anyone even knows he existed is because of you. And even that didn't help him, because he still died broke and forgotten." Dean's hands clenched into fists, and every instinct in his body told him to swing, to punch this man in the face and make him pay for what he'd just said. But Dean didn't move, just stood there completely still with his face calm and his voice even quieter than before. "Mr. Martell, I'm going to give you a chance right now, a chance to apologize and take back what you said and show that you have even a shred of decency." Vinny said, "I don't apologize." "I know you don't," Dean said, "but you're going to tonight, or you're going to regret it." Vinny actually laughed at that. "Regret it? What are you going to do? You're a singer, an entertainer. You think you can threaten me?" Dean told him he wasn't threatening him. He was promising him something very specific. "If you don't apologize right now, I'm going to walk onto that stage and tell the 300 people in that showroom exactly what you just said. I'm going to tell them that Vincent Martell from Chicago made jokes about my dead brother and suggested he died from jealousy and mocked his memory." Vinny said, "So what? Nobody cares." "Everyone will care because I'll make them care," Dean said. "I'll tell them what kind of man you are, what kind of person mocks someone's dead family member. And then I'll tell them that you're sitting front row, and I'll point you out and make sure everyone sees your face." Vinny's smile disappeared completely. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Dean said. "You've got about 30 seconds to apologize or I'm walking onto that stage." Vinny tried one more angle and said, "You do that, you're making an enemy, a dangerous enemy." Dean's response was immediate. "I already have. The question is whether you're smart enough to fix it." They stared at each other, and the associates looked at each other nervously, because this wasn't how things usually went with Vinny. People didn't stand up to him or threaten him back or call his bluff like this was some game they could win. Vinny finally spoke, and his voice came out tight and forced. "I apologize for my comments about your brother." Dean wasn't done. "Say his name." Vinny looked confused. "What?" "Say his name," Dean repeated. "Not your brother. His name." Vinny's jaw clenched hard enough that Dean could see it. "I apologize for my comments about Bill." "And you were wrong to say what you said," Dean told him. "I was wrong to say what I said," Vinny repeated, like a child being disciplined. Dean nodded once. "Good. Now you're going to sit in that showroom, and you're going to watch my show, and you're going to sit there quietly with no comments, no jokes, no disrespect. Can you do that?" Vinny said, "I can do whatever I want." "Can you do that?" Dean asked again, and something in his tone made Vinny stop. "Fine," Vinny said. "I'll behave." "Good," Dean said. "Enjoy the show." Dean walked away and headed back toward his dressing room, and behind him he could hear Vinny's associates talking in low, urgent voices, and he could feel their eyes burning into his back. When he got to his dressing room, Dean's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure, white-hot rage that he'd kept locked down while facing Vinny. His stage manager knocked and stuck his head in and said, "5 minutes, Dean." Dean took a deep breath and let it out slowly and pushed the anger down into some locked compartment in his chest. He had a show to do and 300 people expecting to be entertained, and he couldn't bring this darkness onto the stage with him. He walked to the wings and heard the band playing his intro music and heard the announcer's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Desert Inn is proud to present Dean Martin." The curtain opened and the spotlight hit him, and Dean walked onto that stage with a smile on his face like absolutely nothing had happened. For 90 minutes, Dean was flawless. Every song came out perfectly, from Everybody Loves Somebody to That's Amore. Every joke landed and had the audience howling, and he charmed every single person in that room except for Vinnie Martell, who sat in the front row with his arms crossed and his face like stone, looking like he was mentally planning someone's funeral. Dean noticed but didn't acknowledge him, didn't make eye contact, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under Dean's skin at all. After the show, Dean went straight to his dressing room and his manager was already waiting. "Dean, there's a problem." And when Dean asked what kind of problem, his manager told him that Vincent Martell was telling people Dean had disrespected him and threatened him, and his associates were spreading it around the casino, and this could get ugly fast. Dean poured himself a drink and said, "Let it get ugly, I don't care." His manager looked panicked. "Dean, this is Vinnie Martell. He's not some drunk tourist. He's connected, and he's dangerous. And you can't just—" "I can and I did," Dean said. "He made jokes about Bill, about my brother, and nobody does that. I don't care who they are." His manager tried again, but Dean cut him off. "No buts. I'm not apologizing and I'm not backing down. If Vinny wants a war, he can have one. But I'm not letting anyone mock my brother's memory, not for any reason, not from anyone." Understanding why this mattered so much to Dean meant understanding who Bill was. Bill had been 7 years older and had taken care of Dean when they were kids, had taught him how to box and how to stand up to bullies and how to be a man. Bill worked regular jobs while Dean built his entertainment career, first with Jerry Lewis in the comedy duo Martin and Lewis, then as a solo artist, dominating Las Vegas stages and television screens. When Dean got into show business, Bill had been proud, never jealous, and never resentful, just genuinely happy for his little brother's success. They'd stayed close over the years, and Dean had helped Bill financially when he could, had made sure Bill's kids got good educations, had been there for family gatherings whenever his crazy schedule allowed. And when Bill died just months before this confrontation, Dean had been devastated in a way he hadn't experienced before. He'd cried more than he'd cried in his entire adult life, and felt a hole open up in his heart that never quite healed over. So when Vinnie Martell made jokes about Bill being jealous and suggested Bill died from living in Dean's shadow, it was the worst possible thing he could have said. The one thing guaranteed to make Dean react, no matter what the consequences were. The next morning, Frank Sinatra called. "Dean, what the hell happened last night?" And when Dean asked who told him, Frank said, "Everyone's telling me. The story's all over Vegas. You stood up to Vinnie Martell. Are you crazy?" "He made jokes about Bill," Dean said. Frank went quiet for a moment. "About Bill, your brother?" "Yeah." "What did he say?" Frank asked, and Dean told him everything. The comments about jealousy, the suggestions that Bill died from resentment, the mocking tone while Vinnie's associates stood there and one of them laughed. When Dean finished, Frank said, "That son of a... I would have killed him." "I thought about it," Dean admitted. "But you didn't," Frank said. "You just made him apologize." "That might have been worse for him, Dean. Vinnie doesn't apologize to anyone, ever, and you made him do it in front of his guys. He's not going to forget that." "I don't care if he forgets it or not," Dean said. Frank sighed on the other end of the line. "Dean, I know you're angry, and I know Bill meant everything to you, but you need to be careful, because Vinnie's not someone you cross lightly." "I didn't cross him lightly," Dean told him. I crossed him because he deserved it. Let me make some calls, Frank said. See if I can smooth this over. Don't, Dean said. I don't want it smoothed over. I want Vinny to know that there are consequences when you talk about people's families, when you mock the dead, when you think your power gives you the right to be cruel. 2 days passed and Dean got a visitor at his house, a man he'd never met before. Well-dressed and polite, but clearly connected to that world in ways that didn't need explanation. The man introduced himself as Anthony Cerno from New York and said he was there on behalf of certain people who were concerned about the situation between Dean and Mr. Martell. Dean didn't invite him in, just stood in the doorway and asked, "What situation?" "The confrontation at the Desert Inn," Cerno said. "The words that were exchanged, the apology that was extracted." Dean said, "Extracted? I asked for an apology and he gave one. That's it." Cerno smiled slightly. "Mr. Martin, Mr. Martell feels he was coerced, that you threatened him with public humiliation if he didn't comply." "I gave him a choice," Dean said. "He chose to apologize rather than be embarrassed. That's not coercion, that's consequences." Cerno's smile stayed in place. "Mr. Martin, I understand your position, and between you and me, I think Mr. Martell was out of line. What he said about your brother was disrespectful and wrong. But you need to understand something. Men like Vinny don't apologize, and when they do, it costs them. Makes them look weak, makes other people think they can be pushed around." "That's not my problem," Dean said. "It is your problem when Vinny decides to make you pay for embarrassing him," Cerno said. Dean met his eyes directly. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning," Cerno said. "From people who'd rather not see this escalate, who'd rather not see someone get hurt over something that should have stayed private." "It was private until Vinny made it public by bringing it up in front of his associates," Dean said, "by making jokes in a hallway where anyone could hear. He made it public. I just responded." "I understand," Cerno said, "but I'm asking you as a favor to let this go, to accept Vinny's apology and move on, to let bygones be bygones." Dean thought about it for a moment. "I'll let it go on one condition." "What's that?" Cerno asked. "Vinny never mentions my brother again," Dean said. "Never talks about my family, never makes jokes about people I've lost. He does that and we're done, permanently." Cerno nodded slowly. "I'll convey your terms, but I need something from you too. You can't tell this story, can't talk about what Vinny said, can't spread it around, because if you do, it becomes a bigger problem, a problem that has to be dealt with more seriously." "Are you threatening me now?" Dean asked. "I'm explaining reality," Cerno said. "You embarrassed a powerful man, and that man is willing to let it go if you let it go. But if you keep poking the bear, eventually the bear bites back." Dean stood silent for a long moment, and then nodded once. "Fine, I won't talk about it. But if Vinny comes near me again, if he says one word about Bill or any member of my family, all bets are off." "Understood," Cerno said. "Thank you for being reasonable." Cerno left and Dean closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the full weight of what had just happened settle on his shoulders. He'd stood up to a mob boss and forced him to apologize. And now the mob was sending messengers to negotiate peace, like this was some international incident. That night, Dean's daughter Dina came to visit. She was 16, bright and observant, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw him. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Dean said. "You don't look fine," she said. "You look tired and worried, and that's not like you." Dean sat down and looked at his daughter and realized he couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't explain what had happened with Vinny or what might still happen. Couldn't let her see how close he'd come to doing something that might have gotten him killed. So he smiled and pulled her close and said, "I'm just thinking about your Uncle Bill, that's all." Dina's expression softened immediately. "I miss him too," she said quietly. "I know you do," Dean said. "He loved you very much." "What was he like when you were kids?" she asked. And Dean spent the next hour telling her stories about Bill, about how Bill had protected him from bullies in Steubenville, how Bill had taught him to box in their backyard, how Bill had been the first person to tell him he could make it in show business if he really wanted to. And as he talked, Dean realized something important. Vinnie Martell could threaten him, and the mob could send their messengers, and the whole thing could have ended much worse than it did. But none of that mattered because he'd done what needed to be done. He'd stood up for Bill's memory, had refused to let someone mock his brother, had made a powerful man apologize for being cruel. That was worth the risk, worth the consequences, worth whatever might come next. Because at the end of everything, family was the only thing that really mattered. And Dean Martin wasn't going to let anyone forget that, not even a Chicago mob boss who thought his power made him untouchable.